Woohoo, we're live. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Policy and Finance Committee, March 25th, 2025. I am your chair, Councilman Spencer Duncan, representing District 8, here with my colleagues, Marcus Miller from District 6 and Michelle Hofer from District 9. And with that, I will call us to order. First order of business is approval of the January 28, 2025 meeting minutes. They looked okay to me.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Presentation. I'm not sure who's giving this, the Special Street Fund, but somebody's up.
Hello. So as we move through the 2026 budget process, we wanted to call attention to one of our funds outside of the general fund, the Special Street, or also known as the Special Highway Fund. Yes.
I don't want to stop you. I want to make sure you introduce yourself so that the
good call.
people know who you are.
Carissa Miller, Budget Manager. Thank you. The presentation will go over the fund overview, how this fund receives revenue, historical finances, how we get here. Spoiler alert, it's a little bit over encumbered. 2025 and 2026 budget, what the expenses are made of in that fund, and where do we go from here, and then we'll be able to have some discussion. So the purpose of the Special Street or Highway Repair Fund is for minor reconstruction, alteration, and maintenance of streets, including snow removal and sweeping of all streets and thoroughfares. So one of the challenges that we're facing in this fund is it's projected to be over encumbered by the end of 26 due to flat revenue and rising commodity and personnel costs. So we'll go into detail of what that looks like and how we got to the position that we're in this fund. So every year, this fund receives revenue through the state and county motor fuel tax, and that distribution is calculated based on number of counties and city population within that state. It's a portion of the state's motor fuel tax, and that it varies. Every city gets that based on their population within that state. So as you can see, 2022 to 2024 revenues are remaining about flat within those 3 years. 2024, we got about 5.5 million. And our revenues to expenses, again, you can see that trend of the revenues in 2021 was about 6 million to 2024 revenues, the 5.7. That includes the investments from interest and some miscellaneous. That's why that number is a little bit different than what I just stated, the 5.5. The expenses within the fund, you can see from 21 to 24, it's gone from 5.3 million to 6.9 million. And the fund balance has continued to decrease with those expenses surpassing revenues. I also wanted to note the FTEs here in the Special Street Fund has increased. So in 2024, there was a blight crew that was added and paid for out of this fund that replaced the KDOT prisoner crew. So again, just a little bit more background, salary and vacancy correlation. So in 22 and 23, vacancies in this department averaged about 35%. So we were carrying multiple vacant positions, and it was renegotiated that their salary went from $15 an hour to $20 an hour to help bridge that gap and hire more workers, have some more retention within that department. So in late 2023, there was a contract renegotiation, but most of the expenses were taken on in 24 because it takes time to hire. And then we saw those expenses realized in 2024. So thankfully, the average vacancy has decreased to 15% within this fund, but we're also seeing that within rising expenses compared to revenues. The decreased revenue is attributed to the fact that there's less people driving, we have more hybrid vehicles, more electric vehicles, and less people commuting with lots of work from home positions. So we're seeing a decrease in that motor fuel revenue that we have. So 25 and 26, this is a projection. We have our adopted budget for revenues and expenses. We might be a little low on our revenue projections, so we may come in a little bit higher on the revenue. So likely in '24, the projected end of fund balance may be lower than that negative 673,000, but overall we are looking that it is going to be negative. So in 2026, again, we see the rising expenses, flat revenue, and we are projecting that we're going to need to subsidize somehow. The expenses that we have in this fund, personnel make about 55%, contractual 26%, and commodities 19%. That's going to be their de-icing material, asphalt patching materials, PPE, and repair equipment. So options to increase revenue within this fund, we can subsidize from the general fund, of course, whether that's through an allocation if we want to designate a portion. If we want 1 mil to go towards this fund. We also have a sales tax initiative if we want to include that within it. And then on the other side, the options to remove expenditures. We can transfer additional expenses to the citywide half-cent fund because this is touching existing streets. We can transfer additional expenses to the general fund, same thing as subsidizing, just removing the expenditures and transferring them to the general fund. Or we can reduce services. So with that being said, with the reducing services, the immediate impacts we would see with that is less potholes would be filled, increased time to clear streets in a snow event, overgrown right-of-way, increase in blight. So just want to kind of cover what would happen if we reduced those services to get our expenses decreased. And now it's time for questions.
Questions? Councilman Miller?
Yes, thank you very much. Great information. The quick thing, what you just ended on, the consequences of us not funding this and it going in this opposite direction of what we have right now. Could you expand a little more on the real consequences? And Steve, you might be able to, if Steve's available, to step up and let a little more known of the actual issues that may come if we don't do this, or if we don't do something about it.
Good afternoon, Chair, Councilman Miller. Right now we are running, 3 employees under our, how many vacancies are we sitting at right now? 3?
We're actually full on the street side, and we have 1 vacancy on the light side, right?
Right now we're full for what we're at, but as we continue to lose staff, if we have to cut back on services, more than likely it's going to be less staff to go out there to continue to do these projects that Carissa mentioned, pothole patching, snow plowing. Right now, the fact that we were fully staffed this winter was a tremendous benefit when we're getting all these snow events. But if we end up losing staff because of budget reasons, well then that's fewer trucks on the road, lower response time. The blight crew does all the cleanup, trash, brushing around the city, along the fence lines and stuff to keep the city looking nice. If we have to cut back on blight, then there's less cleanup, less mowing, things like that. It's just, you'll get fewer services from the street department.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilmember Hofer, you have a question?
Yep, I had a couple. Okay, I just want to make sure blight is strictly like cleaning up trash. It's nothing to do with the homeless, unsheltered camps.
No, they actually go out, if there's a small camp, they will go out and clean those up.
You have to go to the microphone.
There are 3 groups that do get involved in the homeless camps, depending on the property they're on. The blight crew does do cleanup on public right-of-way. Tony can expound on that.
Yeah, so if there's, for instance, they just did one today out off of California, the Turnpike Bridge that goes over. So if there's a small amount of trash but nobody living there, they do go out and pick all that stuff up that we don't have to go through PD or whatever for abatement. And also they work with forestry. They take care of all of our roundabouts throughout the city. They do all the weed eating, the spraying, the mowing, all of that of those, so forestry can continue with their projects.
Okay.
But just to follow up on that, I think part of the question then too is, obviously we're already paying these employees to do that work. is there any additional expenses related to that piece of it regarding homelessness that are part of this budget? That otherwise, if we did an abatement, that comes out of a different fund. But are there dumping fees associated that this department's had to pick up, or whatever those costs may be?
Correct. The blight crew does not get involved in the big abatements. That'd be the street department.
Okay, but there's no, I guess my question is, are there additional costs that are being taken on in this budget beyond just paying the employees and the basic services we'd offer as any blight that would have to be picked? Okay, I think that, okay.
No.
That's helpful, thanks.
Okay. Okay, this may be something you don't know yet, but how are we doing on potholes year over year? Are we still increasing? Are we staying about the same?
They're about the same. Personally, I believe our potholes we had less so far this year than what we've had with Topeka Boulevard getting redone, 37th Street, that some of the engineering projects. We still have potholes, but I feel that they're getting better, but I think we're lower numbers right at the moment than what we was last year at this time.
Okay.
There will be an update to the council on April 8th, and I do plan on getting updated numbers on potholes and service requests year-to-date to share with the council at that time.
Okay, then the last one, and this is a little, I'm not sure where to pose it. I saw that the legislature was looking at increased fees for hybrid and electric vehicles. Have you seen that?
Yep.
Is that any chance any of those fees are going to come to us?
Yeah, so you got some good lobbyists up there representing cities, who I won't name at the moment, but we have advocated that if that goes through, any fee they charge will go back into the state highway fund, not the general fund, so that it can offset revenues lost from motor fuel tax. Yeah. That bill still has a chance of passing at this moment, but it's in flux.
It's in flux.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to think all the effects of what's out there, and I know they've been trying to figure out how to recoup some cost from electric and hybrid vehicles, because they're using the roads too. And so they should help pay their share. That was all the questions I had.
All right, I got a few. So based on this FTEs, you're down one. So full staff for you would be 59 people, give or take, since it says 58. I mean, because I was just trying to figure out, I get in 24, we added the 6 to add, which got us up to 61. But now if you have one vacancy, I'm trying to figure out what I know the ideal is 100. That's how I don't mean that flippantly, but I mean in terms of what's fully staffed look like FTE wise.
I don't have the vacancy report on top of my head, but I think we had 59 budgeted for the 2025 budget.
Okay.
So if we're down 2 or 3, we have 57 head count.
Okay, but
I can get you
the
updated
budget
on
is
that.
the 59. I was just curious what a full staff looks like.
So normally our street crew is 41 employees, but my 8 years of being there, we've only filled up to 38 with the 5 nights.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing now. We're leaving the other 3 vacant, so we're not going to fill up to the 41. We're going to stay at 38 moving forward. So,
Yeah, for our 26 budget, we're going to have those 3 positions on hold.
How detailed do we track these expenses and time? And my question goes back, let's use potholes for the moment. Do we actually know this is what we're spending on potholes themselves versus part of the general budget? And do we track how much time is spent by staff on those potholes?
Yeah, they're all based on work orders, and the crews track their time day by day based on what they're performing, both their time, commodities, fuel, equipment, everything's tracked.
So, and part of the reason I ask that is, and this is partly a philosophical debate I've had with public works directors for several years now with people, is I believe we have some streets that are kind of continual problems, but for a variety of reasons, they're either not in the CIP yet or they're 5 to 8 years out. Fine. I question, but they continually have potholes in these issues that we're replacing every year. My question then always becomes, are we looking at the cost of what an overlay would cost yeah, it's only going to hold up for X amount of years. But if I'm not sending crews out there on a regular basis, and if I know what the cost of the potholes and time are versus $100,000 overlay, right? And so I don't expect an answer today, but I mean, I'd like to think we're looking at some of those metrics to say, oh my gosh, let's finally go overlay this road because it's going to save us on the back end from this budget if we can do that.
Right, but we also have to look at, do we want to sink $150,000, $200,000 into a road that we have programmed to be reconstructed in 5 years? And a lot of times that answer is if we can get it to last for 3 to 5 more years by doing pothole patching, even if we have to go in and do a little milling, it's more cost effective to do that than to go in and do a mill and overlay.
Right, and that's where the philosophical.
Exactly.
And what I've told every public works director and stuff is that's a worthwhile conversation. That's also one I'd like to see in front of us sometimes. And if we make the wrong choice, you can say, man, those electeds, they made the call, right? So yeah, I would be interested to see those numbers. Councilman Miller?
Sure, thank you. To that point, don't they use PCI? I remember that acronym. I'm terrible with my acronyms. We use way too many, but I remember that one.
Yes, sir.
Isn't that what he's talking about?
Index. Yep, and that'll be summarized in the presentation also. And our numbers have actually gone up quite a bit on the 3 times that we've done this study. And we're going to be having a consultant drive the roads again this fall to get our new score. And we're anticipating that our overall score should increase once again. And that's a reflection of all the efforts from that half-cent citywide sales tax on pavement rehabilitation and pavement maintenance, and our work our engineering staff is doing with contractors and the work that Tony's staff is doing. And yeah, there's people see the pothole that they always hit, but I think overall they've made some good improvements here. I haven't been here very long, but just from what I've seen, it's they're actually sitting pretty well.
And would you say that if we continue on down this road, say 5 to 10 years, using the method that we are right now, that not only will the staff who see the incremental wins, and so you think it's large wins because you see what down the road if we continue on, how soon do you think that the average Topeka citizen will realize, oh, okay, so the stuff and the complaining we've been doing or the things that they've been doing in relation to our reports about everything around the city, there is actual good progress going on?
You would like, as we continue to do roads, you'll get more and more support from the public, but if there's one pothole on their street that they drive every day, we could have the rest of the town be perfect, but there's still one pothole on their street that they hit.
Thank you. By answering it that way, you took away my follow-up, so thank you.
Are any, and I think I know the answer to this, but I just went, so in the budget, are any of these projects, this is solely for, are any of these projects in the CIP? Is any of the work that this department does a CIP project at all or work?
Sorry, I turned my mic back on. So no, this is just general maintenance. So
Okay.
when we talk about the CIP next week, this crew isn't going out and doing the mill and overlay on Topeka Boulevard
Okay,
from
this is for the
23rd to
maintenance.
29. So this is just strictly maintenance and then no related project work.
Okay. So let's talk real quick about whatever you want to call it, outsourcing, contracting, privatization, whatever fancy buzzword you want to use. A few years ago, for example, and things have changed, so I don't have answers, and I don't expect you to either, but there was a presentation given at that point to a committee that talked about street sweeping. And the costs were lower, and there were some positives. It didn't move forward for a variety of reasons. But I guess I'm curious at this point, as we do face this budget issue and this trend that's not going to solve itself to some degree, are we looking at any opportunities or areas to at least know what the costs are, benefits versus the good versus the bad, the benefits, the costs of whether it's street sweeping, whether some of this pothole maintenance should be, or some of this maintenance should be contracted out, whether we're looking at things like also using some contractors for some blight assistance on certain projects. I mean, are we looking at any of that as a way to reduce, or it may not be worth it, but have we investigated any of it?
Not that I'm aware of, and in my past history, when you contract that work out, you don't get as well of a response time if you get citizens' complaints, and B, the cost typically is quite a bit higher. I can use our snow removal efforts this winter. The amount that we paid Sunflower, they did a great job helping us plow, but what we paid for their 8 trucks versus what our 20-some trucks per shift run was exponentially higher than what it was by doing that in-house. And I'm anticipating that if we did a contract for sweeping A, we'd have to fit into their schedule with everything else that they're doing on private parking lots and road construction, but B, typically, we could look at it more, but typically your costs are going to go up quite a bit by contracting that work out.
Yeah, Tony.
On that contracted sweeping, it was probably 3 years ago or so when we looked at that. I don't know the cost off the top of my head. I do have the information from back then, but that was only 2 sweepings a year. So they would have came in at the beginning of the season and swept, and then at the end of the season, and we were going to have to continually sweep in between those 2 times. So the cost difference, but I mean, that's something we can look into.
Well, and look, the city manager's not here, so I get to talk to you guys, and that's fine. That's yeah, but I think part of it is, and you folks know this. You're in the trenches, so I'm not putting it on you. I'm here jumping in the pool with you. But I think you folks know the problem is we look at this red line and we talk about having to fill it with general fund money, possibly. That sounds great, except for the fact that we're facing a $15 to $17 million budget deficit that we have to figure out heading into the same year. So it's not as simple. So I think for us, it's every single option and knowing whether they're good, bad, even plausible for us is just on the table at this point to figure out how we're going to move all these parts around.
And every agency is facing this because of the decrease in the motor fuel tax. And
Right.
when I was with the counties, I was on the National Association of Counties Transportation Policy Subcommittee, and it was one of their main efforts for this year's congressional lobbying was to find ways to backfill the deficits in those funds. And it's great that people are using less fossil fuels, but at the same time, they funded a lot of good work across the country.
Yeah. So I mean, so just, that's kind of, I think, where some of our questions are coming from is we're trying to figure it out with you as we get into the budget. Yep, Councilmember Hofer.
This is probably for you, Josh. What are we looking at in the half-cent sales tax fund? Is it running on target where it should be? Do we have any excess, which I kind of doubt?
I'm assuming you're referring to the citywide half-cent sales tax fund. So, good question, and we're going to be talking about it again on April 8th. So that fund balance is currently, if we spend everything that current projects are on, we'd have about a $17.5 million fund balance at the end of 2024. And the reason that is so high is because sales tax had, obviously we've talked about this in the general fund, there was a bubble, and then we actually reduced projects during COVID. So long story short, that fund was collecting 19 million. We may have only programmed 18 million, so there's been a natural accumulation of fund balance. So in the CIP, this is a spoiler alert, in the CIP this upcoming year, we've greatly increased the pavement management program and the UBAS program by a total of $4 million to where we're trying to rapidly spend down that fund balance before 2029 when it expires. So one of the considerations we could have is staff and finance could identify expenses within this fund to see if there's ways to take heat off the special highway fund. So that's something we are going to look at. And we just wanted to get in front of the committee today is because a lot of times we talk about the general fund, right? And we don't talk about the parking fund or the special highway fund. So this was just to get kind of our minds shifted a little bit, set to let the council and the committee know that there's other considerations to take place. And so the city, long story short, citywide half-cent sales tax, high fund balance, we're trying to spend it down, and we're going to look at ways that maybe we can cost share this out into other funds.
It runs out in when?
It expires October 1st, 2029.
29.
Yep.
So will we still get 17th Street in on that? I know June we will, but,
You're thinking, so for those are JADO-funded projects.
It's the county.
oh, that's the county.
That's the county
Okay.
one, and that one expires at the end of 2031.
Okay. I'm just trying, we've got enough funds, it's trying to keep all of them straight.
Yeah, no,
Who
I get
has
it,
what.
yeah.
Yeah.
But if there's room in there, I wouldn't be opposed to moving some of this to help balance the fund, and hopefully we'll get some hybrid and electric.
And there's some other, and then we'll talk about this as we get through more of the budget process, but there's some other things we can do on just, for example, we charge employees a certain cost of whatever they're making, and it goes into another fund. We can, and we'll get into that more later on, but we can do some things that we can reduce expenses, the top line expense number without reducing services, and that's what we're going to be talking about over the course of the several months as we get through the budget process. So that's good news. So.
Okay, thank you.
right. Anything else from you two? Good. All right. Anything else from staff? All right. Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. Moving on to our action items. 4A, the fee schedule. Is that
Okay.
you, Josh, or
Yep.
is that you, Chris?
That's me, yeah. So we wanted to get this in front of you guys today. As the memo states, it's been a long time since we've updated the fee schedule. Some of these fees haven't been updated since they were originally adopted, which some of those go over 10 years. So just looking through all the departments and seeing how can we look at what the fees are we recouping our funds when we do a service? And then what do we need to increase for inflation? So just wanted to get this in front of you guys today. I have a couple examples of how the fee increases or changes would impact revenues. So I just wanted to give you guys a couple of those examples. And then we have departments here if you have specific questions about what the fee entails or what the changes, what was involved in those. So some of the examples that we have, the technology fee that we have per permit and license, if we go from $3 to $5, that's an extra $15,000 a year in revenue because we issue about 7,500 permits and licenses a year. Fingerprint fees, we have about 600 of those a year, moving from $10 to $15, that's an extra $3,000. And then the fire fees that are being introduced is about over $100,000 if approved on those. So that's additional revenue as we look in, again, the budget season, as we look at our deficit, just trying to make sure that we're in line with other agencies with our fees. And just wanted to make sure that you guys had time to ask questions. We know this is going to be a longer process, but just wanted to kick off the process today.
Questions, comments?
No, sir, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have it either. I mean, I've looked through it. I appreciate all the notes that are in here that explains why there's a change or no change or an increase, and that's very helpful to give us a baseline for why we raise it $3 or $1.60, which is a random fee, but I get it, but at least because it's comparable. So I do appreciate that. I assume that this has to be approved by the council at some point. Is that okay?
Yeah, so it will eventually have to go through the council, and I think today, kind of like the special highway, this is kind of a kickoff process as we get into the budget just to get this on your radar, and I know it's a lot of information all at once, so get it on your radar, and then some of them could have ordinance changes, and so we'll work with legal to get those established, but kind of just an initial kickoff process.
I do know that we had, and I'm not saying I want them to go up, but I know some of these, mostly as it related to the property maintenance stuff, said it was already set in ordinance. So I get that. It's not a fee based on this. But did we look at those also and decide if we needed to change those ordinances, or did we just skip over them because they were already in ordinance?
Yeah, the PMU, there's no changes on those. They were just included. There was no changes to the ordinances for the 2026 year.
Oh, right, but my question was, did we go back and look at those and say those fees are market rate or they're appropriate, or I can't believe we haven't changed it in 20 years and we should increase it by $5? Have we looked at those ordinances, the fees in those ordinances, and determined if they should stay the same or it's time to make a change? I know we'd have to rerun those ordinances, but I didn't know if we looked at those fees also to see if they should be changed.
I'll have Gretchen answer that for us.
And if not, that's fine, although I would encourage maybe we should. But I also know those get updated every time we do different rate increases and that kind of thing, so.
Yes, Councilman Duncan, I actually have a very great answer for you.
Would you identify yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Gretchen O'Donovan,
Thank you.
Business Manager for TPD. Basically, they redid all those fees for property maintenance unit, I believe it was around 2022, and they actually changed it to where we charge them what it actually costs.
Okay.
Now, that being said, we do have to use some, I guess you would call averages, like for a piece of lumber or something like that. We kind of come up with a stated price, but then if you use 5 pieces of lumber, then you get charged that amount. So both the demolitions and the abatements are charged the actual cost. So there's really no need to
We actually give
make
ourselves
any-
flexibility in those ordinances. Man, look at
Yes,
us.
yes, we
Good
did.
job. All right. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Ed, don't leave yet.
Oh.
I have a question.
Yes, Councilman Hofer.
I know we've had some problem abatement projects. How are we doing on making sure they are paid, and are they getting paid? And in particular, the one I worry about is the one I see every morning at 605 Fairlawn. Because we put up fence, we have mowed, we have done lots of work there. And I don't know if their bill's been kept up to date and paid. And I don't know if that's a problem with some of, I know PMU in particular, but are we keeping up with a lot of these fees getting paid? It's easier when it's upstairs and you're getting a permit. You got to pay right then. But when it's a problem with that you've got to totally fence off the property, those are much slower pays if they get paid. So I'm just curious how you're doing keeping up with that.
Correct. Yes, Councilwoman Hofer. I don't know specific addresses. I do know that they use the process of lack of payment would result in being turned into collections. I don't know if we would be able to look up like a specific address on request to see if that one had been paid or been turned over to collections, but we'd have to go through PMU. I just don't see those directly myself.
I'm just curious how we're doing on that, because that was probably one of the larger problem children that we've had in a long time, and they have been slow to pay any fees on, didn't matter, design fees for the apartments they're not going to build, demolition cost. I mean, everything they were doing, they were very slow, and we need the money to keep things going, and we've already expended those funds, so we need to get reimbursed. So I'm just curious how we're doing on that.
Can you repeat the address? We'll use that as a specific example, and we'll circle back on that.
605 Fairlawn.
Okay.
It's the old Ramada / Holiday Inn. Do you know how we're doing, Rhiannon?
Well, I know that the fees are in prosecution, so
Well,
I
that's
know
good.
that they are tracked and monitored. I don't know if they've been paid or not, but I know that they've gone through the process and they are on our radar. So once they're in prosecution, that is a process that will be followed.
But that's probably one of the bigger ones we've had, and we've got more than just that. So I'm just curious if we're keeping up with them, if they're becoming delinquent. I hate to see money that we've expended and it's not getting paid back.
Understood, yeah. I think it's a difficult question to answer. Keeping up with it, meaning are they going through our legal processes and being held to those requirements? Yes. Are they being paid? I can't answer that, but something that definitely we could get with prosecution and finance.
Okay? Because when we're behind money, we need to keep up. That's all.
My last question, I was a little confused. I know we have some fees on here that we repealed, but they're still on here as, dance hall, right? It says it's $20 a year, current fee, no change, but we repealed those ordinances in 2021. So are we still, I guess I've got a question, if we're not collecting them, why they're still on the list if they're not a
So that might have been a
factor?
mistake because we didn't actually have a good, and this is
Okay,
probably on me, we didn't have a good track record before, so we compiled a list of kind of things
Sure.
we found on our drive. So there might need to be some cleanup on things that we didn't know that got eliminated, and that
Okay.
was on a carryover on a list. So we'll make sure that's.
And that's fine. I just want to make sure there's not
Yeah.
confusion. Like, wait, why is it on here if we're not collecting?
And so, because again, it's been a while since we've been through this
yeah.
process.
And I actually
So
only remember those because I sponsored those ordinances.
there you go.
That's literally the only reason I
So
ever recognize them.
we'll do some cleanup, and then we'll, and as we get with legal, they'll have ordinances. So this is just, again, first
No,
process.
perfect.
but-
Yeah, not a big deal. I
Yeah.
just don't want people to get confused.
Well, no, it was a good reminder for us, so
Yeah.
appreciate it.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Miller.
Yes, real quick, and this is more of a broader thought, because I know we have to change some of our fees to recoup some of our costs. 100% understand that. Some of the fees on here and some of the costs that we are charging, like delinquent fees, I'm personally against them changing, only because it feels like it's taking advantage of people when at a moment that where obviously they don't have the funding to be able to pay for the service at the time. But I wonder if there's a way that to increase the amount of people who may put their bills at a higher priority than some of the other things that we wish they didn't. So we encourage less disconnections. Is there a way for us to not incentivize, but a way for us to waive certain fees or waive certain costs when they are, say they get disconnected, they stay on for a year after that? Is there something to, not necessarily, I'm not talking about giving the city anything or giving the citizens something, but I mean, is there a way to incentivize them keeping utilities connected?
I would have to check with our policies that we have on hand. I'm not familiar with utilities policies on whether or not if they're not paying, do we shut them off, et cetera. But I think that's the conversations we want to have as we go through this fee schedule is what is the best policy for the city to have and how can we incentivize it to get the outcomes we want. So if we want more of behavior, obviously you charge less for it. If you want to deter behavior, you charge more for it, et cetera. Incentive structure, but I'll pass it.
Apologies, what was the question right before you stared at me? Nicole Malott, Utilities.
Yeah. So basically, how do we not make it to where we're trying to recoup some of the fees and the costs that we have across the board, which I agree with, but certain ones, how can we make it so where people aren't extra penalized just because we may have some extra costs, but we're not making them more broke. I don't know how to say that in a great way right now. You understand what I'm getting at? Like, how do we incentivize people that, okay, you may have gotten disconnected, and if you're not a part of the rebate services, there's ways to either recoup some of those fees of when you were down at a bad time, and then for a year or whatever the time is, you're able to get something back or get relief from a future cost.
Again, that's something I think, as Josh said, we're going to have to look at. There are certain policies that speak to when those are charged. Some of them are delinquency fees. Some of them are absolutely the cost of recouping the service provided. I think absolutely we can look at that, though. Okay. We do work with customers obviously there's various situations, but there are times that we are able to waive delinquency fees. It is not a codified process, but it's something we can certainly look at in more detail to see what we can provide.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I'll jump off that because two things. We did expand, I think it's $500,000 now into our assistance fund. So hopefully they don't get to that point. But I think to your point, what we just learned, and definitely worth pursuing, is codifying some policy that they can waive a disconnect fee or a reconnect fee. Because, yeah, if that's just as much as it is to pay the bill, you're right, they can't do it. So, but I think that's a policy decision for us, but it's probably a good idea, Councilman Miller.
Every once in a while, thanks.
No, I mean, I would jump on that if I was you. Let's get that codified to help people. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, with that, unless there's any objection, I would take a motion to approve. So this can move forward to the full council for discussion.
I'll move to approve.
All right, I'll second it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Action item 4B, ambulance service ordinance. I think we get Brandy on this one, I believe. Josh is like, I'm out of here. Get me out of this.
Brandy Roy Bachman, Senior City Attorney.
Hello.
So, have before you ambulance service ordinances. It came to our attention there was an ambulance service operating in Topeka that may not have been aware that they needed to apply for an ambulance franchise. And in kind of looking at our ordinance and how they were to apply for a franchise, legal became aware that the ordinances were a little out of date.
I don't like your t-shirt.
That a lot of these ordinances had not been updated for about 30 years. And so some of the language was outdated, some of the references to or citations to law were no longer valid. So we just made a few changes, and at this time, I would stand for questions.
All right, a couple questions. So last year, I was talking to some folks who said, we went to this meeting about this company in town who does transport services. And I said, don't they need a franchise agreement? So I called legal, and they said, good question. Yes, they probably do. And that's in part what led to some of this. So I guess part of my question is, do we know if they're still operating currently in the city of Topeka? I won't hold you to the answers. There were actually 2 of them, I think, at one point. But
Yes.
do we know what the status of those are?
My understanding is that there are 2 ambulance services operating within Topeka that have not applied for a franchise. One of them, I've been in contact with the owner of one of those services. They requested an application, and that was sent to them, and we are still waiting to hear back. The other ambulance service, we sent them a letter. That letter came back. Apparently, the register address is actually like a warehouse or a storage unit, and they don't accept legal mail. We attempted to get a hold of them via email, send them an email, and we have not heard any response. We do have a phone number. That would be the next step. We were just waiting to get this.
That was my next question. Will these clarifications help us move forward on both of those?
I think it will.
Okay. And then I guess my last question is, I mean, at some point, and getting this I know is a first step, I mean, at some point I would think we have to set some deadlines that say either sign these things or cease and desist, because we obviously have another ambulance company who's sitting there saying, I'm doing everything right, and that creates some other issues. So I understand the problem, and yeah, it's a little frustrating. Councilmember Miller.
Piggybacking off of that, Chair, my 2 questions that I just wrote down was, when did we send that to that one that we got a response from?
So the one that we got a response from, we'd originally sent them a letter. We never heard back from them. I was having a meeting with some individuals from the county, and they said, that's odd. I mean, I know these individuals. I have contact with them on a regular basis. So then they, through word of mouth, they got a hold of us and said, hey, we heard that you were trying to get a hold of us. We never received a letter. So it was, I think, maybe a couple weeks ago, we sent him the application.
Okay.
So we are simply just waiting. I gave him a 60-day deadline. The application is pretty extensive. There's a lot of documentation that we're asking for them to attach to it. So I think they need a pretty extensive time in which to get this application filled out and submitted. So.
Thank you. The time frame was something I was looking for right there, so thank you.
Okay, I've got a couple that I want you to explain to me. What do we consider an ambulance service? Do we consider it, I know what AMR does. The other ones, are they considered just a transport service? Or do they actually have sirens and they take people to the hospital? I'm trying to understand where the difference lies.
So our definition, it's basically anyone who uses, this is no person, except those who use the street or other public ways of the city to operate an ambulance service, which regularly offers and provides such transportation to residents of the city. And maybe you can answer it better, but I think they do more than just transporting.
Okay. Tell me if this falls in the category. I know a company who they transport people, well, in my case, it was my uncle was transported from the hospital to Midland Hospice, end of life. Is that considered ambulance service? Because definitely not emergency. Transport to and from doctor's appointments, but they're in a wheelchair, so they have to go in a vehicle that has wheelchair capability. I'm trying to decide where that difference is.
I believe they're considered ambulance service. There are different almost levels of ambulance service. There those that respond to 911 calls. There are advanced life support. There's basic life support, kind of transport services. But I think they're all considered ambulance services.
This might help as well, Councilwoman. I think what you might be getting at is, so there are, as she said, AMR is the primary ambulance service for the city and the county. They have a contract with the county that gives them exclusivity to run 911 calls within Shawnee County.
Okay.
You have two other services currently, the ones that you've been talking about here. They do non-911, non-emergent transport. So like in our facility, I know like Tech CMS, for example, they have some contracts with the VA. They do like from Topeka VA to Columbia VA, for example, and other VA facilities. What you may be talking about is there are also some private transport services that take people like from nursing homes to doctor's visits and back. Those services, a number of those, they don't have any EMS trained staff on those vehicles. So I would not consider them an ambulance service. There are two other ambulance services that do have trained EMS personnel who do more high-level care transports in between different facilities.
So
but they're not
that's-
running 911 calls.
But that's where you see the break depending on the personnel. So if it's just a driver that's taking them from point A to point B, they aren't necessarily an ambulance.
Yes,
Glorified lift.
in effect, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the kind of what we're referring to in these ordinances are agencies or services that do the transports from one hospital to another. They need medical attention en route, but maybe they don't need to have advanced life support necessarily.
And there's some state law on this too that dictates it. So for instance, part of that application is going to be, again, do you have licensed EMSs? Because if they're not licensed by the state, we can't give them a franchise, they shouldn't be operating also, right? And the state's going to say, and then, because then they fall under the EMS board and some of their rules and regulations. And so if you meet that criteria, that's when you fall into this versus, yeah, to your point, if you're just a transport personnel, the state also defines what that is. So I think we've used some of that guidance to determine what an ambulance is versus just a transit service.
Okay. Because it wasn't under definition, so that's why I'm trying to figure out where it falls. Another question was, how do we deal with, does this affect at all I see them all the time where they come in from Jackson County or they come from Pot County, they're bringing somebody to the hospital. Are they licensed or franchised in those counties? And we don't have to worry about them?
I don't know what the other counties would do, but these would apply to the services that regularly offer and provide transport to the residents of Topeka. And so an ambulance service that's bringing someone in from a different county to Stormont Vale wouldn't necessarily fall under this ordinance.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. And technical one, section 4, need to look at that because it has most of it crossed out, but it's hereby amended to read as follows, and then it's all crossed out. So that doesn't make sense to me.
We're deleting it. My thought process was we don't need to specify which type of service. If they are operating an ambulance service within, for the Topeka residents, they need to apply, and then it would be up to City Council, based upon their application, to determine if the services they offer justify a franchise agreement.
Right, but do we need section 4 at all then? Wouldn't
it
section
just doesn't
5
make
become
sense.
4 and section 4 just be gone? I think that's what she's asking.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah,
it
so
just
you
do
just
that.
get rid of all of section 4 and everything has to shift obviously, but
Yeah, I can do
then
that.
there's no confusion of section 4 is just section 4.
Okay, that's all I had.
Any other questions or comments?
quickly, the changes made on this, do they match the people who currently hold the correct licensing? So the changes you're talking about from 300,000 to 100,000, just small changes like that, all those liability and those insurance policies needs, does that match what our current providers already have, or are they going to need to change anything?
So the insurance requirements, I had spoken to our risk manager before she left, and she had made some calls to kind of find out what other cities, what they had. And this is something that we were just proposed. Our AMR, they actually have higher limits than what is in this ordinance.
That's what I was looking for.
So it wouldn't affect them negatively at all. This would just be, of course, this is a minimum, and this is, if you guys decide this is not sufficient, we can raise these. But we were just kind of trying to figure out an amount that would provide sufficient coverage for the city.
Okay. And I guess the reason I was asking is because if it doesn't change anything, and I'm glad that AMR currently has standards higher than what we even have in here, because if our regulations go up, our ordinance goes up to where someone who is trying to help provide more services so that AMR or TFD is not overextended to keep our expenses down as a city, that they wouldn't not be able to afford to be able to do business here because of the extra cost in liability coverage.
And that was one of the things, when we were talking to the risk manager, that was one of the concerns she had, and we're trying to figure out the amount of insurance, is that didn't want it to do the minimum so high that we couldn't, that some services would be prohibited from operating out of Topeka.
Okay, thank you.
Questions or comments?
Nope. Do we need to move this forward?
Yep, I will move to approve as amended. The removal of section 4.
Okay, I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you very much, Brandon. All right, action item 4C, downtown parking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hello.
Jason Klein, Deputy Director of Public Works, and I'm going to turn this presentation over to Sterling Emerson, our parking manager, to walk you through it.
Good afternoon. In your packets, you have the presentation that we presented last October. After that presentation, we were directed to reach out to the downtown major stakeholders. So we'd like to take a few minutes to review our recommendations after those meetings that we've had. All right, just a quick review of some of the current issues we have. We talked about some of the current zones that are confusing, inconsistent, needing to clean those up. Our current policies allow leapfrogging, so you can park in one space, go out in an hour and 45 minutes, move to a different space, and play the leapfrog game all day long. Also, we talked about street reserved spaces not being permitted for food trucks, the way the code reads right now. And then the big one, revenue at our current rate structure does not meet the annual expenses. In January, we held engagement meetings with the DTI Board, Downtown Merchants Association, one-on-one meetings with major stakeholders, merchants, employers in the state of Kansas. After those meetings, we did receive, and during them, positive feedback on policing the leapfrogging. There was no objections to the food truck proposal. We had positive response to the signed 15-minute loading and unloading spaces and removal of the orange cones that are currently out there. No objection to increasing the cost of the 10-hour meters. There was a little pushback or weariness on garage increases, but everybody acknowledged they were reasonable, looking at the amount of time since that had been changed. But in our discussions, both with property managers, business owners, they were all passionately opposed to charging for on-street parking in the 100 blocks and on Kansas Avenue. Some of the comments we received from them is 2024 was the worst year they'd ever had. Now it's just not the right time to do this. If we do this, we're pushing businesses out and several will have to close. So after these meetings, we have the following recommendations. 1, increase the garage monthly rate from $67.75 to $74. We'd begin in Center City, Crosby, and Townside as their structural repairs and those have been completed. So those would be the first ones we would do after we notified public and made the changes we need to make internally to make that happen. After that, the Uptowner, we'd make the increase there when it's open to the public again. 512 Park and Shop, upon completion of the structural repairs, hopefully within the fall of 2025, we'd make the change in price. And then Coronado, upon completion of the structural repairs there, hopefully no later than 2026. 9th Street would increase from 4743 to 51 because of the contract with BNSF that we currently have. We'd increase our 10-hour meter price from 50 cents to $1 and our 10-hour monthly permit price from $44 to $74. Again, this would be as we have time to engage, let the public know we're making that change, and then there'd be some software, hardware changes we'd have to make before we could do that. We'd add code language from Kansas Avenue block zone to all time zones that would eliminate the leapfrogging. We have some code in there currently that does not allow that in Kansas. We take it to the entire downtown district. Introduce designated and signed 15-minute pickup spaces on Kansas Avenue. Get rid of the orange cones. Relax restrictions north of 6th Street. Remove some metered spaces west of Topeka Boulevard. And then remove the yellow hoods on the 100 blocks east and west of Kansas Avenue, charging $1 a day in these areas. And then institute paid parking on the Kansas Avenue of $1.25 an hour, and this would not be effective until January of 2026. Just a quick review, what that ends up looking like on the map is you have basically our biggest real estate, the most sought after, being Kansas Avenue, would be green, which would be our $1.25. As you move out from that, you'd have 2-hour, $1 an hour parking. And then further out and around the state buildings, you'd have your 10-hour parking. And then as you move out even further, you'd have the purple 4-hour free parking. In your packets, you also have the ordinance. That ordinance basically addresses the leapfrogging, changes in wording to allow for the 15-minute pickup spaces, and then wording that would allow for the food truck proposal. Also, you have a resolution. That resolution would recommend restoring metered parking on the side streets and implementing metered parking on Kansas Avenue beginning January 1st, 2026. The resolution also addresses the pricing changes in the garages as we discussed in the slide presentation, and the 10-hour meters and the 10-hour permits. And with that, we would be open to any questions.
Questions, comments? Yep,
Yeah, quick
Councilmember
comment. I
Rowland.
think the updated map is good. I like putting the premium pricing on where it's needed, and then people can have options to get there earlier and walk a couple blocks if they want to, if they don't want to spend the extra fund. So that gives people options. I like that a lot.
Are these proposed rates in the garages different or in line with what was actually already approved several years ago by the council?
They're in line, they're within the ranges, with the exception of the 10-hour previous recommendations, so that is an ordinance change. The rest of the recommendations were within the ranges that were previously approved, if not executed.
So why do we have 10-hour meters?
So the 10-hour meters allow someone to stay longer than 2 hours. They were obviously instituted before my tenure with the city. What I can say is that essentially west of Jackson, we don't have a lot of parking garages or lots that service someone who's needing more than a 2-hour option. So if you're west of Jackson, this does allow for some other options, whereas somebody could park longer term on the street and still be adjacent to where they needed to go without a long distance to walk. That was essentially why we've continued to include them. Currently, they're charged at a lesser rate than the other meters. This would make them a price parity, so we're still getting the same revenue as a 2-hour meter. This would just not turn over as often, in theory.
So have we looked at, I'm trying to think what I'm trying to ask here. I mean, obviously, I get the 2-hour issue. I'm assuming if you need 10 hours, you're probably working somewhere down here. So to your point, people are using those. Do we know, like, how many of the permits are we selling? And do we think the majority, like when we go out, are we taking a look at if the majority of people parking in those 10 hours, as opposed to paying, I guess it'd be $5 a day right now, or 10 under this, are they buying permits to park there? Or are they just using them as is? I mean, I know we can't technically track, but we kind of can. I mean, we're driving down there and we see if they have a permit.
We don't sell a lot of 10-hour permits. I don't have that number right in front of me. But the 10-hour permit parking typically is used by state employees, is what we see a good majority of it. And like you said, a lot of those are people that are working. The state parking lot is full, or they're running late for work and they want to park right in front. So the reason we came up with the $74 for it is it's the same as a garage. So if the garage is maybe 2 blocks away and you have a spot that's maybe a little closer that's a 10-hour, you have the choice. I can park in the garage underneath, or maybe I can park a little closer. Now the choice is yours, but the price parity is the same either way.
So I would say we have about 60 monthly. I was just able to reference. We have about 60 people who take advantage of the monthly permit, so they're not feeding the meter every day when they park at those 10-hour meters. I would say the majority of customers are for those 10-hour meters outside of the permit holders are people who are visiting the Capitol, who may not be familiar with the garages. They're visitors. They have more than 2 hours worth of business to conduct at the Capitol, or they're a visitor and aren't familiar. So this gives them an option where they can continue to pay and not receive a citation if they are not familiar with where the garages are. Obviously, we try to make it as clear as possible where they have longer-term options. We always encourage people who are staying longer than 2 hours to use a garage, but this, especially around the Capitol, does give another option.
And those can only be 10-hour meters? I mean, they can't be, how do some of these meters work? Can they be reformulated to be a 4-hour meter, a 5-hour meter? I know we like even numbers. We don't want to do 5.
They could be. So we could change them to a different time period, or we could remove the meters entirely and just have it paid by app, at which point we can set that setting whatever we would like to. Basically, this juncture was that we have a lot of different zones right now. We have 1 hour, 2 hour, 30-minute, 4 hour, 10 hour. Simplify that as much as possible. If we find that the 10 hours could be a 4 hour or a 6 hour in the future, that could be something we could change. But as of right now, we wanted to have as few different types of parking options as possible, because one of the issues we do see is more than the cost of parking is people get confused, they don't know where to park, and they get frustrated, which we want to limit as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess in my head, partly where I'm going with this is if they were, say, 4-hour meters, we'll just use that as a baseline. That would address issues of people coming out here, going to the Capitol, getting some lunch before they're leaving downtown. If some of those 10-hour meters at this point, many of which we think are being used by people who work downtown, state employees and others, personally, I would like to then drive them to buying that 10-hour permit, and being able to park in those 4-hour spaces even along those areas, because you've got the 10-hour permit. But obviously, I'm driving revenue up a little bit that way, and also kind of simplifying that process. Say, you're a long-term parker down here because you work down here. I get it, but that's not what really the purpose of the 10-hour meter was for. That's what the permits should be for, is for people who work down. So I don't expect to respond. That's just as I'm digesting some of this, kind of my thought process.
And I think if all these changes are implemented, that's definitely something we can track. Now that those are going from 50 cents an hour to $1 an hour, how does that change the customer pattern? And do we need to adapt from there?
Yeah. And this is a longer term conversation. not today, and I know that we've got to, part of the issue we have is, and I don't think it's good business, but I understand why we do it, is we're using on-street parking to help supplement our garages, right? I mean, that's, because this is one unit, correct? And so some of the dollars we're trying to generate on the street, those are for the garage operations and maintenance, correct?
So currently, we bring in about 80% of our revenue comes from the garages, and about 20% comes from on-street parking. This proposed model would increase that percentage more to on-street, but yes, we do look at it as one system. In order for the streets to be available to guests, the parking garages have to be full. In order for us to get people into those parking garages, they have to be well-maintained, which part of the revenue obligation of that, we do look at on-street as part of that revenue.
What I would like to see, and obviously not today, but at some point in the near future, maybe if it's possible as this goes to council, if it does here, I'd be interested to see what the numbers would look like if we operated them, not necessarily with employees who do both, but maybe there's some, if they were independent, if we said the garages have to operate on their own, this is what it would look like, and that may be a horror show, I understand that, the finances, right? But versus, and this is the street parking operation, and there's what it generates and what it costs to maintain. Because I think at some point in the future, as we again start to talk about the future of a couple of these garages, whether we're going to own them, whether they're going to be put into some projects being discussed downtown, what that looks like then financially moving forward. And maybe getting us to some model in the future, if it's at all possible, where we're not dependent on the other, and then every decision, well, we can't do this in the garage because it's dependent on on-street parking, or vice versa. It's kind of been, through nobody's fault here, that's kind of where we're at right now. And so, if possible, I'd like to see what those expenses are individually and what those revenues would be if we just said tomorrow, they got to operate on their own. Tell me what that looks like. And I think that would help us either know there's a path or, oh gosh, that was a terrible idea, Duncan. Get it. Run from that. So
I can tell you to fund what we would need to do to make parking revenue neutral, we would have to take the parking garage, the cost of a rental space in a parking garage to roughly $95 a month in order for the garages to operate completely independently under our current expense model.
Which, although truthfully, is where we're headed by 6 years from now anyway. I'm not saying we should do it, again, I'm not saying we should do it tomorrow because there's ramifications, but just for what it's worth, it would be appreciated if we could kind of look at those two models here at some point. Councilmember Miller? Okay.
And to address your question, there is a cost involved to maintaining the street parking. I think a lot of people look at the garages just because of the large amount of money we put into them. Last summer, we spent several man-hours restriping downtown, which the parking does within itself. We have three full-time employees in the facilities for parking. One of them full-time basically maintains meters, hoods meters, removes hoods from meters. So that person is basically street parking, removing coins from meters is involved. So I just want to make sure it's clear that there is a cost to operating the street parking, just like there is a cost to operate the garage parking.
Sure, no, and I absolutely get that. And then the question then becomes and the reason I bring it up is, again, if the rates wouldn't work that the garages can run on their own, but if we do get a point where the street parking is cash flowing, let's say, for lack of a better, where it's a revenue generator, that thing gives us two paths. What's best for the future of downtown? Is it that we can reduce some of how we operate parking because we don't need all that revenue, or that's revenue we're generating for a general fund that is always in need of revenue, right? Again, those are policy decisions at some point. And some of the parking too, with the parking garages, kind of like my pothole philosophical discussion with overlays versus the potholes on some of those streets. At this point, and we have to pay the bonds back on those garages, and that's a piece of this, but that's also a sunk cost at this point. And I don't want us to be continually tethered to that decision in not making positive decisions that fix our long-term problem over the next 5 or 10 years because we've got that hanging there. If we can sort of get a clean break that lets these generate. So having all that information helps us kind of navigate that to hopefully make your jobs easier eventually. That's the goal. So that's where my brain is at as I've looked at this stuff, for what it's worth. Any other questions or comments?
Me.
All right, so,
I do.
oh, sorry, I thought you said no.
I said me.
Oh, okay. Councilmember Hofer.
Okay. Tell me so I can go back and read it again. Which is the section on the food trucks?
Section on which?
Which section in the,
Oh, that would be in the ordinance.
So under section 6, permit for hood or cover,
okay,
this would add, section 12 would be new language to the code.
okay, so it's 12 is actually the one for food truck parking.
That's correct.
Okay, I need to read that one again. I wasn't finding it. Okay. This is a little off topic, but when do we think we're going to get the parking back at City Hall? This fall?
So we are hoping to have all that parking back by this fall. We have a few additional projects that are ongoing. We've been doing some patching on the west side of the parking on City Hall today. So there was some damage because of all the heavy equipment.
Right.
They were repairing that today. We do have some ongoing projects where we'll be tuck pointing and roofing some areas of the building that will still take up some room on that side. So part of that will become available again in the next month or two. And then we still have anticipation of needing, until the T-back portion of the project is finished and the T-back ramp is finished, needing to take up some parking on the east side of the building throughout the summer. We are hoping to have all of that wrapped up by September. However, a lot of that is weather dependent when you're working on the exterior of the building.
So what's going to happen with the parking in front of City Hall and on the east side? Because that used to be metered.
So prior to the project, the first row of City Hall was metered. The east side the east side of City Hall was primarily employee parking. That would be a policy decision for the city manager in consultation with the governing body of whether or not we want to return those parking for public use or retain them for employee use.
So some of those people that are parking now in front of City Hall will go back into their lot.
That is the intention as of right now.
So some of them in front could go back to metered parking if that's what the city manager decides.
Correct.
And the east side, probably
Would also be a decision for the city manager. Like, as I said, prior to the construction, it was for employee parking. It has also been metered in the past. So it's a decision as to whether we want employees parking in that location or some more of that parking should be available to the public.
Okay, I was just thinking in terms of revenue, it's money that hasn't come in. I don't know that it'd be a great amount, but I was just trying to look forward and see what was going to happen with that. I think that was all I had. Yep.
Anything else, Councilman Miller? All right, so this needs to, at some point, go to the city council for discussion, right? Presentation and discussion. All right, so I'm gonna make a motion. It's gonna sound way more ominous than it is, I promise, because I still need to digest some of this. I may have some recommendations. So what I'm gonna do is move to advance this to the city council without recommendation. Because I don't know that I'm ready to endorse it, but I think it needs to be in front of the whole council for discussion and debate and consideration as we work through it. So that's why. But I also don't want to vote no on it, because I will if the motion is to move it forward as the recommendation. So
Okay, do we need to make these recommendations today? Or can we wait until the next Policy and Finance Committee meeting so that we can give our approval on it before it goes to governing body?
There is no specific urgency, other than the fact that the longer we wait, the less revenue we're generating. And we are, as we mentioned at the last presentation, facing probably 2 years and a few months from today, the parking fund being insolvent.
Will deplete.
So that is the urgency, is that the longer we delay any decision on changing the revenue structure, that could potentially accelerate the time period in which the parking fund would become insolvent and have to rely on general funds.
Okay, thank you very much. And I guess it's just more of you have a long history here, sir. Is that normal for us to?
well, we could do a couple. It's not abnormal. I mean, because like I said, I don't really want to vote no because I like some stuff in here. There's some other stuff I haven't quite got my head around, but I'm sure our colleagues would also have thoughts, and which will take time for them to work. So I guess we have a couple options. We can either go ahead and advance it on, from my perspective, without recommendation, so the whole council can start getting this presentation and discussing it. We could sit here definitely and say, let's give it one more month. We can bring some ideas we have. I can tell our colleagues at the next meeting because we'll schedule a policy and finance for next month. Tell them, we're doing parking, you show up if you're really interested to hear it here, to provide some initial thoughts before we push it out and it goes forward, and then they could, so it's really choose your own adventure. I mean, to Jason's point, and I'm okay if we want to wait a month too, but, because like I said,
I get what Jason's saying, and I can appreciate the timing of it. I just don't know if I feel comfortable of approving it without us actually approving it.
Well, it's not uncommon, and I don't even know if I'll be ready to vote yes. But I want to put it in front of everybody at some point because that's the only way it's going to move forward.
Well, those two options, I pick B. If y'all both pick A, then we pick A.
We can give it one more month and invite our colleagues, and that may help staff if there's changes before they give it, or at least explain it to a few more people, and then I'm really good with either one. Okay. Do you have a preference?
I think I'd rather send it to council and have them get started on it because it's going to take a little bit for everybody to digest this and ask their questions. And it's an all-council final decision, so I think that's the direction I'd go instead of waiting a month. Because I think in a month we're not going to have a lot more decided between the three of us.
Just
I think
my annoying
going to be
suggestions.
more opinions when it gets to council than it with what we have.
Which is why I think we should have our ducks in a row before we go there. Because I feel like if we go there, it's going to take even longer. But again, just my thoughts.
It's up to you. You're the tiebreaker.
Tiebreaker.
No harm, no foul. It's all right.
Put me on the hot seat. Because I already know a couple that are going to have a lot
I made a
of
motion. You
opinions,
can either
but
second it or let it die, and then we can go from there.
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor of advancing it to the full body without recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Our last item on the agenda, I think, because somehow I've lost my agenda. So
Pilots.
sure. I don't know what the heck I did with it. Yeah, I know it's pilot. I just didn't know if that's the last thing on the agenda. Okay. Don't know what I did with it.
That and public comment.
Yeah, it's in this pile somewhere. All right. So pilot fees. This should not take long. This is more of a first crack at this thing and a little explanation, and then we'll go from there.
So at the request of Councilman Duncan, he asked payments in lieu of taxes or pilots. They are payments made to the city by various organizations or agencies based on agreements where the city may have granted tax abatements. So essentially they're not paying taxes on their buildings to the city. Currently, no external organization or commercial buildings with tax abatements voluntarily pay anything to the city of Topeka in the form of a pilot fee. So this discussion would be, do we want to set those pilot fees? How do we want to set them? And who would we want included in those pilot fees?
So obviously the pilot fees, under state law, we cannot require pilot fees, and that's fine. I don't want to start charging a bunch of entities, pilot fees just because we need revenue. But one of the conversations that's come up over the last year or so is, to their point, they're voluntary under state law, but nobody's really paying them voluntarily. And we are the capital city who have many properties, and we love them. They're all great. They employ people. No judgment there or concerns. But they also do require fire and police and infrastructure, so they aren't paying into that piece of the system because they're not paying property taxes. So one of the conversations that came up from one group said, well, great, how much would you want? And so the thought process has been, well, it is kind of hard to say to folks, if you would like to pay pilot fees, this would be a recommendation you could use based on, in this case, square footage. So that's where this has come from. It's not something that is commonly done. Pretty much it's, if you want to pay us, great, and if you don't, that's fine. But this would at least give us a template to provide to those organizations to say, hey, pilot fees are a way for you to help the cause. And if we could generate some revenue, obviously it's good for the general fund and then reduces hopefully some property tax issues. So that's what this is. I wanted to get it in front of everybody. It really requires no action today. I wanted to make you aware of it, take a look at it. I'm going to send some thoughts. I actually had this for like a month and a half or something, but now that I've got some time and it's official, I've got some thoughts on how we figured it up. I'm not sure we should we need to give discounts one way or the other. If you have more, we could probably go to a more flat rate, because the truth is getting something is better than getting nothing, which we get now, right? So even if we start small, and I'll send some of those comments back to staff. I appreciate that they did this when they did it, and I apologize a little for putting it on the back burner, but I did want to get it in front of the meeting, so it's something other council members, we can start talking to them about. Any other input you guys have as we work through it. We'll probably put it back on the agenda for next month, and with maybe some recommended changes. So it's different, but man, come on, we got some big people who could give us a little bit to help the cause. So that's where this came from. Any thoughts, comments, or questions?
Yeah, no, I also like the idea of seeing if some folks who can pay a little extra, but I imagine the reason that a lot of them are in business because when they have the opportunity to not pay any extra, they do not.
That's right.
And they spend extra that they could have spent with us finding other ways to not spend other taxes.
Yes, what you said.
Right. So no, I like the thought of it, but if state law doesn't require us to do anything, it's almost a moot point to me. So I don't really know why.
Well, again, it's like when you go to the pancake feed where it's just a suggested donation, right? They give a number, $5. That's the suggested donation. You can give us 2 or you can give us 10, but we'd like 5. And I think right now, and in talking with some of the businesses who don't, that's kind of been there. Like, well, great, what's your suggested donation? Give me that, and then I have something to work with. And it's like, okay, fine.
Okay.
You want to know what it is? We're going to come up with a suggested donation. And
Okay.
it doesn't make them pay it, but at least we'll have something as opposed to them just making up a number with some rationale behind it. So, yeah. They probably won't do it.
Yeah.
We can guilt them a little. It's easier to guilt people than when you have a.
That's fair. I guess I'm more just worried about our staff spending time on something that ain't gonna happen anyway.
No, I hear
they
you.
could be
And I
more
appreciate
efficient
that.
doing something else.
Okay, my question, explain the chart to me. We've got buildings, we've got their square footage. It says city tax, is that property tax?
Correct.
This is
That
what
they are
pay now.
currently paying. So
Correct.
this is just an example of what some of the businesses are paying.
Yes and no. It was a matrix put together based on a small sampling of buildings that had larger square footage, smaller square footage. We kind of picked and chose a couple of them. And then their city tax appraised value and found what they're paying per square foot based on the taxes that they're paying, just to get a jumping off point. And whether or not we continue to go down that avenue to do by square footage or not, I did get some additional information from the county on buildings that are not currently paying taxes. They have a somewhat of an appraised value. They don't put as much time in those. So I can use that against some of the samplings if we move forward with the square footage, or if we want to do just a flat fee based on entity, employees, however we want to determine their donation amount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we're looking at donations from these 200 plus.
Well, yeah, and that's not going to
Exempted.
happen. We're not
I
gonna
know,
get-
but I'm
but-
just trying to understand what.
I mean, it is pilot
looking
fees,
at.
and like I said, they're outlined in for this purpose. I mean, the reason the state created that option was so that entities who aren't paying property taxes, and there are other communities where they're paying something. Some of the larger organizations who don't pay any property taxes, and even some other taxes, do voluntarily pay the pilots. But it's not mandatory, and I'm not looking to make it mandatory. But
No, but it hurts the rest of the
right,
tax-paying public because we have a large percentage of.
And there's a
Square
handful of
footage?
cities in Kansas, and we're not quite at that point because of our size, although we're close, but who approach almost an equal number of tipping point of properties that pay property taxes versus not. And in this case, it's obviously the majority of that's commercial properties, which of course just means the less they're paying in, it shifts all the burden to the residential properties,
Right.
which again is what we're trying to get away from while also paying our bills. So,
Yeah.
got to pay those pesky bills like everybody else. So that's the thought. Get some of these commercial properties to help pay a little to offset some of that.
Okay.
Thank you, staff. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone here who would like to offer public comment? This is your chance. Speak now or don't, I guess. All right. Any other final comments or questions from committee?
No, thank you, Chair.
All right, we will plan to try to set up a meeting a month from now. We'll let staff send something out to see what'll work, and we'll go from there. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.